Jen Wilding here. I wanted to do a quick video on what I'm doing since the Zeitgeist Movement. As some of you know, I am a former United States coordinator of the Zeitgeist Movement, but I have not been in that world for some time, and there's been some confusion around that every now and then because so much information goes out on the internet and is circulated, and people still see my videos and talks that I did. It's very confusing to people who are new to the movement. They don't know what I'm doing, if I'm currently active, if I'm not. I still get messages, and sometimes people speak to me as if I'm involved. I sometimes get tagged in posts, and so I just wanted to clear up. I was involved in the movement from 2008 to 2014, and I was a coordinator from 2009 to 2014. I started out as a Chicago City coordinator with chapters. When we started out, as it was an idea, people were convening on the internet. Peter Joseph had set up a forum. People were in the forum saying, hey, how do we talk about these ideas? How do we get these ideas out? We want to bring attention toward a resource-based economy, towards specifically the ideas of the futurist and industrial designer Jacques Fresco with the Venus Project. How do we do this? We started with chapters. I started doing stuff in Chicago. I then started getting connected with people all over the state of Illinois. I ended up becoming a sort of coordinator for the state, even though most of the activity happened in the city of Chicago if we had any meetings, and everything else was online. Then people in other states, from an online resource we were doing at that time, I think it was Ventrilo, which eventually became TeamSpeak, but in the early days, it was Ventrilo. We were coordinating with people from all sorts of many countries using the English language on a voice chat, and people from various United States were saying, hey, how did you get Illinois started? And it turned out that Gilbert and Peter were getting so many requests to help build a chapter, and they knew I already had one, that they asked me to step up as a point person to help people get other US states and city chapters going. So that is a short history of how I got involved in that role. The role was a communication role. The role involved me having access to a mailing list. And that might seem like something small to some of you, but I'm gonna tell you what I learned about that position was that that mailing list was the most valuable thing to people coming into the movement who were seeking a power and influence position in the movement, and they viewed me as a conduit to that. So let me back up a little bit and tell you what I'm doing right now, and then I'll kind of tell you what I learned in a summary from that experience, and a little bit about, very broad, about why I'm doing what I'm doing now, which is I am not involved with the Zeitgeist Movement. I am not even directing people there unless they specifically ask me about resource-based economy information, or if they ask me what I used to be involved with and they just want to look it up. So from that standpoint, I am not evangelizing a position for any organization. I am simply doing my own thing on my own path and encouraging people to do their own thing on their own path. And I am encouraging people to seek truth in whatever way resonates for them. I do not currently endorse anything that's coming out of the movement because I'm not a part of it. And when I started moving out of my position in 2014, it was going in a different direction than the direction that I had signed on to take it in, or that I was facilitating. So I could see that it was evolving in a different direction that I didn't think was useful. And so I wanted to put my personal time toward efforts that I felt were more useful towards what I thought would be a good thing to do with my time to promote social change in a way that has some ultimate result. It's very challenging to do, and anybody that's been in any kind of activism will be able to tell you it's very challenging. I will say this: my time in that role with that movement and interacting with all of the many lovely people I met as a result of that experience, including my husband Jason, was one of the greatest learning experiences I have had to date, especially around human beings behaving in a broader social scope where their focus is, in a lot of ways, how they interact with each other, what the conflicts are, what the challenges are. In essence, what I thought was most valuable from the Zeitgeist Movement was, if you have an ethic, as we did at the initial ethic of wanting to help move society in a direction of accounting for a systems theory approach to human beings thriving, not just surviving, but thriving in their environment in a healthy way that also supports the ecosystem in which we reside in a healthy way, and all through data that is collected and resources being managed in an intelligent way toward that goal. Okay, the idea was we have the intelligence and the resources technically to feed, clothe, house everyone on Earth and provide education on systems that people could engage in that would be promoting of health to us as individuals and as individual communities, local communities as well. So it was a global effort that was intended to support all the way to the individual, the micro. The experience I had with the movement showed me what those challenges would be, in that people actually come with different ethics to an organization that is looking at a world domination kind of organization, any kind of system that includes everybody. You have the attention of people. Oh, you're where people are looking to change the system globally. Well, we have ideas about what we want to do for that. So the movement itself was constantly being injected with people coming attracted to it from where people were gathering about world change. And it would often be people connecting from what they shared as common criticisms. And within the Zeitgeist Movement, that was about the monetary system being no longer useful. And which is better, communism and capitalism, and just the isms within money. And that was within today's thinking. But the original goal of the movement, supporting Jacques' work, was to think beyond that to the next frontier and approach building something different from a Buckminster Fuller kind of angle, that you would build the system that you would want to see and make the old one obsolete, so that people would just know there's another possibility. People would have experiences with something else to know there's another possibility. To just interject the idea for another possibility into the social ether of attention and consciousness. Okay, we did start with an ethic, and a lot of people mistakenly think that we were the science. We were about science. We understood the importance of the scientific method, and we understood that technology is a way to solve a lot of the social problems that we see today, including poverty and sickness and access, that technology would be the way. So the idea was, with the ethic of wanting everyone to thrive individually, having not any particular group in power over another power. The idea was kind of idealistic, as it seems, to evolve out of a need for a small group to exploit other people for the system in which we operate. To understand that we could choose another system as the mass. And that's very important. That ethic is very important. Even to this day, I think it's very important. I was constantly in the role of United States coordinator, in the role of redirecting people to the message, of spreading the message of what we were about, instead of focusing on the internal power organization within the movement. And I did it so much, and Peter did this so much, that I had to identify it as a real challenge that you would have in the real world, that people are oriented behaviorally, conditioned to first look at the power structure and see where they fit in. And that even might be an organic thing, as a sense of, we do it subconsciously in every role of our life that we're in. We're figuring out, if you're the boss, you have a different orientation in an interaction with your staff because there's a power hierarchy. If you're a leader of a country, you have a different orientation because of your position as perhaps an elected official, allegedly. But there's a perception that works for how the behavior, how everybody figures out how to behave. And what I learned is that so many people feel so disempowered in their life that when they had an opportunity to have what they viewed as a big influence in some global idea, it activated people to just like, I'm in. Sign me up, I'm doing this. And then what happened was a lot of people would inundate me with messages of, you need to endorse my project, my business. They wanted to use me as the conduit to the masses. It was so interesting. This was, they wanted access to the mailing list. So if you were a member and you corresponded with me, I fielded so much of this that you didn't even know it was happening. But it was very exhausting to deal with. It's a different type. It's not exactly trolling, I would say. They had, from their own viewpoints, of course, the best intentions, and of course, the best idea anyone's ever had. So landed into my inbox so many times from so many different directions. And my way of handling them was, let's put this into an organic approach. I'm not just going to endorse someone with a lot of flair. I'm using the values that we espouse in the movement to decide what I let people know about. And the way that I did that was I said, hey, you have an idea, put it into action. Let me see a positive result from what you're doing. Video, reports, interviews, something about what's going on. And then when it comes up as, how do you do this? Or how could someone go about doing this, whether it's an intentional community, whether it is a particular system within a community, like feeding people, whether it is a nonprofit, do that to some level of success, okay? That's the experiment part. And then show me that it's having a result, and then I will say, hey, if anybody wants, that's how I intended to use my role. You want to be a coordinator in your city. I'm not an obstacle to that. Here's how to do it. Our instructions were, take this material that you have access to. We weren't hiding any of our material. It was all very readily accessible online, what the movement was about. Have a lecture, educate people about it, be a point person for your community and start gathering people, and then send me the video of you doing that. And I will say, hey, everybody, I've seen with my own eyes, and I'm aware that this is happening in this city. This is your point person. Here's what they're doing. A lot of people eliminated themselves from a coordinator position because they were going what I consider kind of the lazy route. Their perceived view of how to have success was based on what they see in our culture, which is I contact an influencer, they endorse me, and from their endorsement, I get money, attention, volunteers, whatever. So they looked at me as being that person to endorse. What they didn't realize is I was getting hundreds of those requests in my inbox all the time. And all my original goal is to just get people connected within their individual communities to do education outreach. That was the original goal. But then it was everybody from intentional communities to food banks to lending libraries, which are great. And anybody that got any of that off the ground in any form, we would plug it in a meeting and say, hey, here's attention to this, right? And anybody that I wouldn't, they would come and say, I am in the business of solar power. We need everybody to be getting jobs doing solar power because this is eco-friendly energy and we need your movement. You know, I need them to become my sales reps. We had everything from like those kinds of things. And people, you know, then people would say, my friends and I have this idea for an intentional community, but we need your movement to fund it, but we're going to be the example, and then you guys can use us as an educational example. That's how far it would be. And I would say, great, how about this? We're not your starting point. We're the group you come to after you're already successful. Good luck with that. And they also had access to the forums. It's not like they were prevented from talking about this with the membership. What they wanted was me as an influencer that people trusted to endorse. And why? This is what is significant and relevant to today. The average person, as you probably figured out, doesn't have time to do research to the nth degree on so many fields. We were talking systems theory. So we were in researching so many areas. It's a high volume of research. So they needed the cliff notes. People with families, jobs, they needed the cliff notes of tell me what I can support. Tell me what in my community I should support. There were a lot of people that were trying to say, I don't know what to do, tell me what to do. And the goal of the movement was not to tell people what to do, although some people wanted it to be. The goal of the movement was simply to educate and allow people to organically decide from the value set and that knowledge what to do locally that would have ramifications in a larger scale sense. It's very challenging. And that same challenge exists today, as you can see more than ever. People are stressed out. They are economically challenged, even more so than they were when we were doing our activism, or when I was doing my activism back in the day. Education activism only. I always orient to going to advocate for something versus protest against it, and I recommend that as an orientation if you're an activist, as the better way. But that was a learning I had personally before even the Zeitgeist Movement. People today don't have the bandwidth to do all the research. And they have been used to getting their messaging of what to do, tell me what to do in a crisis, from mainstream media and mainstream science, the industry. And they have gone to the media and mainstream science, so just a few popular people that are elevated by the mainstream media and politicians with power, to say, tell me what to do. And I am aware that when you have that conduit, that you have people who have sought into that conduit, who have an idea of what they want people to do, and they're looking for the influence. And right now that has been the shortcut. They know people want to be told what to do. They want to be told even step by step what to do by somebody that's almost in a religious figure type capacity, giving them instructions so they can absolve themselves of any guilt of if they make the wrong decision. We're to that level of stress. So what you've seen and what I'm aware of is the groups that have always been vying for power to be able to tell people what to do have found their ways into those conduits. They have found their ways into out of the influencers' mouths. Tell them this, tell them to do this, tell them to do this, and I will say this. Those efforts are coming from all different types of ethics behind them. You know, the movement, we had an ethic that humanity should get together and use its resources and intelligent systems to survive and thrive. And we should do that with each other as an advantage. Like, it should be a thing that we do collectively from a loving standpoint. That was an ethic. That falls in the area of a belief, a religious value, almost. I should say not so much religious, because that's a buzzword that's going to trigger a lot of you off. A spiritual value. You know, that's not a scientific value. Did you know that? Did you know even the Zeitgeist Movement began, even Jacques Fresco's work, which we uphold science? You know, you could be a scientist who's into scientism as a religion, but ultimately what really matters is what you view as the desired outcome. What we should care about most are the ethics of the people who are using the mouthpieces of influence to tell people what to do. And unfortunately, their ethics do not line up with the Zeitgeist Movement, even though I have seen people from the Zeitgeist Movement espousing them as if they do. There has been a lot of confusion with the source of influence, with the actual source of information, and the actual ethics behind it. Confusion, and that is intentional. Let me give you a little bit more of an example. People are, unfortunately, confusing, and this has always been the case, but to an extent that even people who I would hope would not have this confusion are having this confusion. That's how prevalent it is. They're confusing the scientific method with science, the industry, as if they are the one and the same. They're confusing the influencer expert voice with both the data set being true because of the influencer voice. They've outsourced their critical thinking to that source. So they assume the data is true, and then they also have assumed the ethic behind that is one that they share. Now, maybe it is one that you share. It's just not one that the movement that I know of, people who originally signed on to, share. So what I've seen is a lot of confusion now within the movement. It's not very cohesive. This is another reason why I'm not a part of it. It was very challenging when there is a greater influencer than me. Peter Joseph was always a greater influencer as a founder and as a person who created the most content people connected with. The Zeitgeist trilogy movies were the reason why people were aware of the movement for the most part. Sometimes it would be through the Venus Project, but for the most part it would be through Peter Joseph's movie work. So it makes sense that he would be the greatest influencer point in that movement. And as far as I know, he still is. My challenge is that there was a point in which my focus intersected with that. And then there was a point in which it started to diverge, most particularly in how to go about creating social change and what our true obstacles are. Right now, I'm an advocate around transparency of data. I am an advocate for transparency of scientific research data. I am against the censorship of that under the guise of their own, this is true versus, using the conduit of influence instead of allowing people to take a look at the actual data and have it be freely circulated. From a resource standpoint, politicians have more power than ever on resources, even as non-experts in any particular field around those resources. And it's gotten to the point where they can appoint people as extensions of the power they seek that support the way they want the resources to go. So in essence, manipulating data and data sources to facilitate power. I am aware that we have been under the influence of government power that is not visible. I am aware of shadow governments. I am aware of behind the scenes activity that even myself used to dismiss as, oh, well, there's no way it could be so organized and shady at the same time because naturally it falls apart. Government is way too incompetent to actually achieve anything truly large and nefarious. I have come to abandon that idea from an awareness of my own research and studies into cult behavior and how prevalent it is, and the likelihood of it is actually more likely than not based on when you're in a cult that is specifically power-based, you will move mountains to make the right connections and put the right people in place, and you will create a sense of guarded secrecy with the highest consequences in order to get that reach. I'm not so naive that I don't believe that exists. I'm aware that it does. I'm aware that it exists in many forms and is far-reaching. I think we need to come to terms with that. We cannot do science, as in the scientific method science, to create the technology, to create the system that we want to support the ethic of what folks invested in the Zeitgeist Movement and Venus Project ideas uphold as an ethic, unless we have true data access. And as long as there are groups that guard data, censor data, and manufacture data and create manufactured behavior through the use of those influence conduits, conditioning, social engineering, we're all familiar with that. Some of you may know, as a profession, I work as a hypnotist and coach and a trainer around how to influence the subconscious mind for individuals, but that also provides me unique insight into subconscious engineering through social communication. And I see it all the time, propaganda all the time. And I will probably spend more time eventually on videos and such, even in detail showing people how, because it's becoming more apparent to me how people are unable to identify propaganda. It's a problem. And I think that's important. Those are the things I'm focused on now for the interim, because you can't even have a social movement around creating a system with values if you don't have actual information about what real resources we have, what real data there is to work with. Right now, I can absolutely see that scientific information is being heavily manipulated through channels of influence to influence behavior for the purposes of greater powers. And you can classify that as conspiracy theory, but I would classify it as conspiracy fact. I don't think of it as a theory, although you can certainly theorize about the ways in which that is being done. If you can't see it, you're having to go with some theories. But there are identifiable circumstantial components that you can identify that give us clues. And I think we've been missing the clues for too long because we wrote off that it was possible for there to be, for example, another Third Reich influence on the masses to do things that they would later regret. And I think we're there. And while that's unfortunate, I am still optimistic about the ethic that people I met in the movement hold all over the world. And I would just encourage people, anyone who would consider me to be an influence of any sort, to lean in on your own critical thinking and respect people on their own path, even when they're making the wrong decisions, because force is something that even Jacques Fresco would tell you is not a way to do something, because you will create a counterforce in doing that. You can't force people into a behavior. It is in many ways unethical, but also ineffective. So what am I doing now? So what I'm doing now is I realized when I was in the movement that so few people had a deep understanding of what I felt like the movement really was and what I felt like Jacques Fresco was really teaching. Specifically, yes, I said Jacques Fresco. I would say a small percentage of people who were activists in the movement could fully educate people on the values and also embody the values in their life. So from my vantage point of knowing a lot of people and having a smaller group in that smaller percentage, I might even say it was only 5% perhaps, that's how small. I looked at that 5% and asked myself the question, what do they have in common? How do we create more of this understanding, this level of understanding? Because we're not having success with the larger group of the deeper understanding. And most of it was because people latched on to something they liked about the outcome of the movement. Hey, I want to live where I don't have to think about money anymore. I want to live a great life and be able to travel on maglev trains. I want to feel I'm helping the planet and not have us be polluting ourselves into oblivion. I want to be able to feel free in my community, that they're supportive for me. My sense of belonging would be taken care of because everyone individually, their main needs were met. And so that would be great for me to be a part of. Of course, everyone was interested in the result. What was the most confusing was understanding what we could understand about what was leading us to the problems that we have and things we need to consider to unravel those problems and build the system we want to have. And it's not just an understanding of science it as being important. That's not enough. It is getting deep with interdisciplinary, but also even beyond that, it is about being open to having conversations where your own ideas may be challenged, and to really look at them in a way that is unemotional for the evaluation, even though the outcome is, of course, emotional and something that we are attached to. It's a challenge. And that's at a personal level. How do you interact with people who are scared of what you're doing and talking about? How do you interact with people who are seeking power and want to derail it and take the focus in another direction? Like, we need to just focus on saving the whales, or we need to just focus on cleaning up the ocean, or we need to just take the, everybody wanted to take the whole focus of the movement and put it into a micro project area. And of course, yes, that was a value of the movement, but the movement was what we started to call an umbrella organization that wanted to support everybody wanting to do these things. But my view now is that we cannot do them if we don't have transparency of data, if we don't have transparency of the actual power structure. And I am looking at power structure now, so I understand why that was important then. But to the extent that information is hidden. See, in the Zeitgeist Movement, we didn't hide information about what we were about. We didn't hide it. We hid our mailing list because everybody wanted that for wrong reasons. And that was to protect the people who were members. But other than that, our manifesto is very public. Our meetings were even very public. It made it hard for people who even wanted to say we were a terrorist group to categorize us as such, because anybody could log in and see, oh, well, I can listen to what they're talking about. How often can you do that with terrorist groups, really? So we were very open about things that we were doing. Not much was happening in it wasn't secret information going on, at least that I'm aware of, and I was pretty involved in, whatever levels you might imagine were the highest. I suppose I was there, which is why people were concerned about me, right? They even reflexively were concerned, as if I was going to influence. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, they were way more idealistic than me about how fast the movement was going to happen, as if I personally were going to influence their life like next week. Very concerned about the power of the movement. And of course they were, because those people were power-minded. That's how they think. So I'm power-minded in this sense. I want for it to be exposed, people who are operating from an ethic that I don't subscribe to, such as depopulation. There are some people operating in power positions who are saying, yes, we are advocating for health. And they also advocate in a religious sense toward a depopulation view. That is an ethic that is held, that they are operating in a large-scale resource form while holding that ethic. And it's our business to know, even though that group may decide, well, we wouldn't have cooperation if everyone knew. That's where we are, I think. Yes, that's very conspiratorial, isn't it? Again, I'm not so naive to think these kind of conspiracies don't exist. High levels of power structure do exist. We even knew that from a banking standpoint in Zeitgeist 1, but we sort of got lost along the way in all of the side conversations. And that can be a strategy that someone could use to keep us from focusing on the information we are missing. We cannot do science without data. Our scientists in their respective fields cannot do proper science without being able to share data. The fact that some of them are being censored, even with their jobs threatened and their resource money threatened, is showing how money is being used to exploit even the scientific industry, which we would think everyone holds the same ethic, that's an assumption. The assumption that everyone in the science community has the same ethic that you do is quite an assumption and not fact. And that needs to be something that you consider when evaluating expertise and when you're aware that an industry is divided like it has been recently. So I'm just an individual doing my thing. I am still doing hypnosis and coaching. I'm creating a tool for helping people to get more in touch with themselves from a standpoint of depth psychology, from a self-coaching standpoint. That is because I'm aware that what happens internally with our own problems gets projected on to the community socially. That is what I have attributed to the extreme emotional polarities that we see happening in the larger social consciousness. I believe they're rooted in individual consciousness of people that are struggling with coping with the trauma of what it's been like to live in a system that has exploited them. And we have to learn how to face and integrate that trauma so that we can move forward into problem-solving mode. So that's where my focus is right now. I am not associated with the Zeitgeist Movement, other than just still connected with some people in the movement loosely as friends. A lot of people saw my name on social media. They connected to me, Facebook or Twitter or whatnot, and they did so because they know me from the movement, but I guarantee you I'm disappointing people right and left. I've even had some diatribes written, how dare you? You were supposed to think this because you were with the movement. And I'm an individual. This also is insight into their way of evaluating influence, right? They should look at me, as you should, as an individual with an individual perspective and an ethic behind that perspective. And then the question should be, does her ethic match my ethic? Is the way she's going about things match the way I would go about things? Now, I won't stand for, Jen, you're supposed to be about science. I might be, in my perspective right now, more about science than you are if you're confusing the scientific industry with the scientific method. I am not tripped up by the language confusion, because my expertise, you need to remember, is influencing the subconscious. And I know how that's done through propaganda. And I see a lot of people that I'm connected to, that are TZM people I'm connected to, who have completely absorbed the propaganda as something that is their new orientation. And when they start using their platforms while they're connected to me to promote that propaganda, I just cut it off, because we do not share the same ethic, including in the way we source information. And you can take that personally or not. I'm remaining connected to people who are even still within that propaganda, who I know personally through personal experiences, work, family. If I've met you and interacted with you, and I really want to stay connected because I'm interested in what happens in your life, because we once shared an integrated experience together, and I want to hope that you're well. Even if you're pushing propaganda, I might mute you, but I want to stay connected to you. If I only have been connected to you because you thought I was a part of the movement and then you started pushing propaganda, I will probably cut you off. I'm not even interested in convincing you or evangelizing to you a different way. I'm just stating it in case you're interested. I am no longer, as I said, doing any coordination for the movement, doing any advocacy for the movement, pointing people to those resources, because I cannot say that they are currently where I am. That's just me being in integrity with what I personally endorse. I do, of course, still share a lot of the main ethics that we started with. I want better for all of us. I want better for everyone as far as what they have access to. I am not convinced that's going to come from a global communist regime. I am not supporting efforts to move toward that. I am not supporting efforts to control the population through fear and authoritarian measures. I am supporting information and disclosures of data that has been kept secret that the public needs to know about in order to create true positive change. And I'm just mostly on free speech platforms and interacting with people who share that value of how can we find data that will give us clues as to what that data that's being hidden is. I am interested in connecting with people who are looking to find out what data is hidden, and I am interested in supporting efforts to dissolve power structures that are in the way of getting information to the people that is needed. To that end, politically, I may have a different orientation than what you might expect. Again, you have to remember what my background is. I am aware of propaganda. One thing I will give you that is a clue is I did not jump on the Trump hate train. I did not jump on that. There is a reason for that. I am aware of misdirection. I am aware of power struggles. I am aware of influencers that have been compromised as far as media goes. I am someone who is an advocate for going direct to the source and challenging what you've heard about someone or something. Evaluating for yourself if you have the time to do so. And if you don't have the time and you want to find trusted people and you say, Jen, just give me the info, you're a trusted person. I don't want to be responsible for all of your information because I make mistakes, but I do update information as I find out new information, so that's something. What you may be interested in is, if you want the lowdown, you could contact me individually and ask me direct questions, and I can be more upfront than I can on censored platforms, or catch me on a free speech platform and you'll be able to get a lot more information about where my focus is or things I'm talking about as far as concern discussions. If you want to know what I'm up to professionally and follow that, you can check out my channel under my name, Jen Wilding. Pretty simple, pretty simple. So I'm not doing any specific social activism yet. I'm not doing any specific social activism that you need to know about. I'm not trying to evangelize any particular point. I just wanted to do this video because people still confuse me with being someone who's currently active with the movement. And some people who are new to the movement, they don't know. They just saw my video, they just want to figure out. In their mind, I am what they just saw. They haven't, extrapolated, okay, maybe she's a human being that's on a path that is getting new information and updating as she goes. And maybe she's in a different place right now, which is the case. But I wouldn't say it's an adversarial position. I have always said, even if you caught me in talks of the movement, I even said positive change I think will happen. It won't even be attributed to the Zeitgeist Movement because this will become many movements. And the reason I said that was, even as I sat there, I knew, look, we had the division of the Venus Project split, right? People with like views split off. And it's because you can have the same ethic, but have different ways of communicating it and different ways of what you're focusing on that attracts different groups of people. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I don't think you have to have one movement. I think what's more important is attracting people to the basic ethic and to some of the fundamentals, like that we need actual data. We need to know the difference between science and the science, the method, and science, the industry. We need transparency. Those are things that I would focus on right now. And then initially from there, it's about what you're passionate about, what path you're on. I know people from the movement who have gotten into neuroscience. I know people who have gotten into permaculture science and have become activists there. People who studied engineering, people who studied food systems, creation of large-scale food systems, people who have gotten into farming, people who are interested in intentional communities, and anybody who, that was a popular conflict we would have, anybody who would say, we need to build an intentional community because I have needs right now that would solve, let's do it. And they would consider that activism. I would always tell that person, do it. Like, let people know that's what you want to do. Give it a go, and then come back and let us know how it goes. And the reason I would say that is because the Zeitgeist Movement did not advocate low-tech communities. The Zeitgeist Movement advocates large-scale systems, technology, solutions, because the view is we're all in the same ecosystem, and you cannot escape. You can try to escape in your corner of the world, and you can do that for a short period of time. But the social problems from the macro will come into the micro. We found that out even in the movement. And the pollution will invade. And if there is destruction and earthquakes, volcanoes, floods, whatever, other people may invade your community. Scarcity still exists in our current environment. And what the Zeitgeist Movement advocated for was a unified system to create a post-scarcity world. So the outcomes that you heard us excited about were all related to post-scarcity and not scarcity. Now that may be a pipe dream, I don't know. And the only thing that would keep us from it are the people on their individual paths choosing something else. But that's also a reality we need to comprehend. That is a data point we cannot ignore or pretend it doesn't exist. Humans not being on board and wanting to go their own way, like we have a natural sense of autonomy, that has to be factored in to the way you get there, and that is the challenge. And it's why people would say, if you don't have the steps for me, you're full of shit. No one has the steps. No one has the steps. 1, 2, 3, 4. And anyone who does, be wary of them, because they didn't do it from anything experiential that I'm aware of yet. So people who wanted to create intentional communities, I would always say, go do that and then report back. I never once had anyone report back that they did it successfully. Most people fizzled out and they blamed me because I didn't put out a mailing list promotion of everybody needs to join this person's intentional community. So I'm at fault clearly for that. But the other thing is, this is point one. If you are in an intentional community, you have to be someone who is able to motivate people in a community around an idea that affects the community. You have to learn that skill. That is your step one. And for a lot of us, that's where we are. So I hope for all of us, I wish for all of us. I'm watching the news, people in all different countries having many different experiences. Some just, my heart goes out to you with just beyond natural disasters, but also government tyranny that you're dealing with is off the charts. My heart goes out to you. We are doing whatever we can where we are, as far as I know. When I say we, the people that I know that advocate these ideas, we're limited, doing whatever we can. And I'm not putting blame on anybody that this is happening. It's just a matter of we're going to deal with it in how we deal with it. And all I can do is encourage critical thinking and remembering the ethic that we share. The ethical view that if we all did learn about what's possible, more of us would come around to creating a system that would make our current system obsolete. And we need to do that without the obstruction of power cults that are hiding information and manipulating data, manipulating messaging, creating cultural conditioning that is not conducive to that. I'm going to still lean in on promoting what I am for and what I can do, which is help people at an individual level deal with their own sense of stress and trauma so that we can be in a position to act should that become a greater possibility that's on the table. I wish everyone the absolute best wherever you are.